Hello everyone and welcome to Art Smart. Today we're going to be talking about Popeye the Sailor meets Sinbad the Sailor, and it's a film from 1936. This is a lovely print and I'm really proud to show it to you today. A lot of public domain prints are not in very good shape, and this is a rare exception in that it looks quite beautiful with its colors here. You can see that with the Paramount logo that started, and obviously with the Popeye the Sailor title card here. It's just beautiful with color. And usually when you see a public domain print from the 30s, a lot of the times they have kind of a reddish tint to them as they've kind of degraded over time. So I'm really proud to show this to you today, and I'm glad that you can see it in a very clear, colorful way, which is close to how it was intended to be seen up on the screen. Now, the Popeye the Sailor cartoon here is a part of a 3-film trilogy that was released in 1936 and was billed as the Popeye Color Features. These films were intended to compete with Walt Disney and live-action cinema in general, and this was meant to be the top billing feature on the program, even though it was only 16 minutes long. Yes, that is double the length of your usual cartoon, but it is not quite the length of your typical feature, which at that point was between like an hour and a half. So this is kind of a compromise between your usual cartoon and your usual feature. The Fleischer Brothers were very much aware that Walt Disney was coming out with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in the next year. In 1937, Disney released their film. And they were also aware that, quite frankly, features had really kind of taken over most of the cinema. Even the live-action shorts with things like the Three Stooges were starting to lose their popularity. And so I think Fleischer realized that they needed to kind of break into the feature market. And I guess at this point they decided to do a kind of split their losses approach, and they decided to have 3 double-length animated films, but not quite features, but they would bill them as features. I'm going to talk more about that in a second, as I think this was a mistake for the Fleischers. They've made several mistakes in the 1930s, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But I want you to look in the background here. You could see a really live action looking background moving behind the characters here, and it's a really interesting effect, as you can see it right now as the characters moving through this live action background. It actually is a real live action background. It's not just a trick that they're doing. What they basically did for the Fleischers was they had a setback device, which was a live action background that they would put behind the animated cell, which was filmed right in front of the camera. And so the camera was picking up the animated cell, which was right in front of the camera, and then behind the cell you could see the live action set that they were filming on top of. It made for a interesting effect, and the Fleischers definitely are famous for this particular effect. To this day, people think that it's just interesting and different, and nobody else in the animation field did anything like this. Disney had something called the multiplane camera, which was a camera which allowed them to kind of move in and around cells in a realistic way. And honestly, I think that was a more detailed way of trying to have a 3D effect. But the Fleischers came up with this kind of compromise way of doing it by having the cell right in front of the live action background. And while I don't think it's quite as effective as Disney's, it is pretty interesting to look at and somewhat amusing. So while I think that they probably should have done a multiplane camera, they definitely still had a interesting effect that they're doing here, and it makes them unique. So, take it as you will. But anyway, I just wanted to let you know that I think it was a mistake for the Fleischer brothers to make these 3 features, unfortunately, kind of double-length cartoons and not true features. What happened was these films were released, and they did do quite well. They were at the top of the marquee throughout the country, and people were excited to go see a longer than usual length Popeye cartoon. People loved Popeye at this point. He definitely was, at this point, more popular than Mickey Mouse, and people were really interested in seeing the films. However, unfortunately, the Fleischer Brothers lost momentum very quickly because these were not real features. And while they did well for what they were, and they made money, Disney in the next year would come out with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which was a real full-blown feature, and these films were quickly forgotten. And the impact that they had on the film industry was minimal compared to what Walt Disney was able to do with his films. And it's somewhat unfortunate for the Fleischer Brothers that they didn't just go full-blown into having one long feature film. Even if they would have taken these three stories and added them together, I think that still would have made it more satisfying than having these individual films shown separately and not really being a true feature. So I think they made a mistake there, and ultimately the Fleischers would pay for that in the 1940s as they were constantly trailing Disney. I'm going to talk about that more in a sec, but I just want you to look at the background moving there. It is lovely. You can see the different colors in the stones behind the bird that's flying, and the background actually comes out into the foreground in some cases, making it really, really interesting to look at. But again, it's not a true 3D effect. And today we look at it as this kind of being awkward looking. It is kind of cute, but it's awkward looking. The Fleischer Brothers in general just continuously made these kind of half-hearted efforts to follow what was happening in cinema. And I think in the end it really hurt them. The fact that they did not have truly believable cartoon worlds created by having the multiplane camera ultimately made them look like they were a little bit behind the times. And quite honestly, they kind of were. Yes, it is an interesting effect, but it's not something that makes you feel immersed in the cartoon world. It is somewhat distracting to see the live action going on in the background. I also think that the Fleischer Brothers didn't quite learn how to do character animation the way that Disney did. And when you see Popeye and things here, Popeye doesn't quite move yet like a realistic person. And that's okay. He's a cartoon, and he's a silly cartoon at that. But I do think that it kind of made them look like they were less progressive than Disney. And of course, the fact that Disney in the next year would release their feature-length film, which made tons of money, made the Fleischers look kind of half-hearted in their effort here. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in just a minute, and hopefully you guys are going to continue the art smart. Bye-bye.